Under the harsh Georgia sun, Officer Derek Holt dragged an elderly black man from his car, mocking his calm silence as weakness. He threw his license on the ground, snapped on the cuffs, and smirked, never imagining who stood before him. That old man was Elijah Reed, a senior FBI agent who had once trained the very people sworn to uphold justice. The line between arrogance and accountability was about to shatter. How far can humiliation go before truth strikes back? If this moment makes your heart burn for justice, hit like and share, because silence never changed the world. Now, let's begin Elijah's story. I remember that morning so clearly you could frame it. Georgia light just beginning to warm the edges of the pines, a hush on the two-lane road that made every small sound feel bigger, tires over gravel, a distant lawn sprinkler, a mourning dove somewhere in the trees. Then the sleek black Lincoln rolled past me, windows, clean chrome, quiet. An older black man sat behind the wheel, pressed shirt hat set low, the kind of dignity you notice even if you weren't looking for it. Later I learned his name, Elijah Reed, 72, on his way to see his wife's grave. At the next stop sign, he eased to a soft halt. His hand came off the wheel, and for a beat he touched a photo taped to the dash, just 2 fingers gentle as a prayer. I was close enough to hear him when he spoke, barely above a whisper. "Still driving where we used to walk, Ruth. The world was still until it wasn't." A police cruiser slipped in behind him, lights cold and sudden blue, and red jumping across the hood of the Lincoln, like someone kicking a hornet's nest. Siren short, one bark enough to say, "Pull over now." He did. He signaled. He drifted to the shoulder by a stand of pines, and he stopped so carefully you'd think he worried about waking the dead. The door on the cruiser popped. Out stepped Officer Derek Holt, 30-something, square jaw, the posture of a man newly promoted and trying it on like a suit. He took his time to approach, thumb hooked along his duty belt, the confidence of someone who's never had to second-guess his own tone. He leaned to the window, and even from a few yards away, I felt the drop in temperature. "Morning," he said, voice flat as a measure stick. His eyes traveled the car like they were scanning for a lie. "Nice ride." "Yours?" Elijah turned his head. His face was calm in a way that makes you respect it before you understand it. Would it matter if it was silence, the kind that rings? Holt didn't like the answer, maybe the words, maybe the way they were said. He requested license and registration, and Elijah handed them over without a tremor in his voice. Holt skimmed the papers like a man looking for a reason to be right. He found none, and because he found none, he made one. He flicked the documents back harder than necessary, let them flutter, and when they hit the asphalt, he smiled with the casual cruelty of a man sure no one will ever ask him why. Elijah reached down, careful, slow. His hands shook, just a little age or anger, or both. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just picked up his papers like a gentleman picking up a dropped napkin at dinner. When he stood, Holt had already stepped closer, shoulders squaring the shadow of his frame, cutting across the open window. "Step out of the vehicle," Holt said. Elijah looked at him, then at the road, then back at him. He clicked the seatbelt free and stood, not hurried, not stubborn, just deliberate, as if the air had rules and he intended to follow them. That's when I saw Holt's hand dip. Not to the radio, not to the pen, to the gun. A resting touch, the way someone taps a pocket to make sure the keys are there. It wasn't a draw, but it was a declaration. Elijah saw it too. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He let the seconds breathe, then said almost kindly, "You afraid of old men or of mirrors?" The line landed like a dropped weight. I watched Holt's jaw set a tick of heat under the skin. He stepped half a pace closer, close enough for me to see the pale ring where his wedding band might have been on a day he wasn't on duty. He looked over Elijah's shoulder into the car as if a luxury vehicle could confess to a crime. Across the road, a young woman had paused her morning jog. She held her phone up without a word, the camera eye open and unblinking. Another man stopped beside his pickup, folded his arms, watched. The hush on that stretch of asphalt changed from peaceful to expectant, like the breath people hold right before a verdict. Holt started the questions that sound like commands. "Where are you heading? Why that cemetery? Do you live around here?" He ran the plates, then ran them again, like the numbers might eventually cooperate with his suspicion. He asked if there was anything in the vehicle he should know about, and when Elijah said no, Holt heard no as a challenge. "Step back," Holt said. He went to the trunk latch like the car owed him its secrets. Elijah stepped back. His shoulders lowered the way good men lower their shoulders when they're trying not to make a bad situation worse. A gust came through the pines, flipped the corner of the photo on the dash. The edge loosened its tape and slipped free. It slid down the console, caught on the floor mat, and drifted to the gravel. Elijah saw it. Holt's boot came down as he shifted his stance, unaware or uncaring, and the heel smudged the smiling face of a woman I now knew was Ruth. I heard Elijah's breath catch. Just once. A small, private grief swallowed before it could become a sound. He bent to pick up the picture, but Holt cut him off with a palm. Hands where I can see them. From where I stood, I could see a second thing tumble from the passenger seat to the ground. Soft and unassuming, an old, sweat-salted baseball cap navy, the bill worn thin. The embroidery along the front read a single word, faded, but unmistakable if you knew it, Quantico. Holt didn't notice. Another officer, younger Davis, did. He hesitated, a flicker in his eyes, like recognition trying to surface. Holt's head snapped around, and the moment ended. "Sir," a voice called from across the way, the jogger steady but firm. "He's an old man." Holt's mouth twitched. The attention annoyed him. He wanted the road back the way it had been before witnesses. He told everyone to step back, to keep moving. He told the truth to wait its turn. Elijah looked at the jogger, at her lifted phone, then straight into the lens. His voice carried just enough to cross the road. "Record it," he said. "Truth forgets without witnesses." That sentence wired the air. You could feel the current turn. Holt heard it too. He didn't like being recorded, and you could see the calculation, fear of a camera, fear of a mirror, fear of himself flicker behind his eyes. He chose the worst of the options. He chose performance. He took Elijah's papers back then, let them slide from his fingers again, not a toss this time, but a drop, the way a man drops something he considers dirty. "Hands behind your back," Holt said. "Now." Elijah did not argue. He turned. He placed his hands together, wrists already marked with the pale bracelets time leaves behind. Holt snapped the cuffs. Metal on bone a little too tight, the sound ringing louder than it should in that quiet morning. Somewhere down the road, a siren yelped another unit, or just Holt hitting the switch without thinking. The jogger flinched. The man by the pickup muttered something I couldn't catch. Pine needles shivered under a wind that didn't reach the ground. Elijah stood as straight as a man can with steel at his hands. He looked at the photo of Ruth where it lay near the curb, the corner damp now with dew and dust. He looked at the Quantico cap face down by the tire. He looked at me too, not at my face, but at the fact that I was there, one more witness. And he nodded once, the way you nod to a stranger at a funeral. That's when the tone of the morning finally broke. The cruiser's lights strobed harder, as if the car itself wanted to drown out what it couldn't undo. Holt gripped the chain between the cuffs and guided Elijah toward the back seat. Not rough, but not respectful. Not necessary, but done anyway. Before ducking his head, Elijah turned again to the phone across the road. He didn't smile. He didn't scowl. He simply held the camera's gaze like a man willing the future to be better than the present. The blue and red washed over his face, painting years of patience in borrowed colors. And there it was, the feeling I can't shake when I think of that morning. The sound of a breath drawn and held the split second before a storm, when the first cold drop hits your cheek. Sirens pressing the air flat. Light flashing off the Lincoln's mirror into Elijah's eyes, a thin blade of glare that made him narrow them just a fraction. Not fear, not yet. A warning. A start of something none of us would be able to claim we didn't see. He inhaled once deep and measured as if laying a marker in the lane. Then the door closed on him, and the road, so quiet a minute earlier, filled with a tension you could taste. The sun was merciless by then, sitting high and hard above the Georgia pines. The heat made everything slower, heavier, the kind that bakes tempers into something dangerous. Officer Derek Holt stood beside the Lincoln, one hand on his belt, the other waving Elijah back like he was swatting away a problem that didn't know its place. "Pop the trunk," Holt ordered. His tone wasn't curious, it was daring. "Men like you always hide something." Elijah didn't argue. He didn't even sigh. He reached for the lever, his fingers stiff but steady, and the trunk lifted with a creak. Inside, nothing. Just flowers for a grave folded neatly beside a well-worn Bible. Holt ignored both. He pushed the bouquet aside with the back of his hand, muttering, "You think this makes you look harmless." Elijah stayed silent. He looked down at his own hands, the ones that had built, trained, written, and once defended the very country that now stared at him like a threat. Those hands, creased, scarred, dark with age, rested against the side of the car, as if holding it up against the weight of all that disrespect. A light wind lifted something from the dashboard. The photo. It fluttered to the ground again, and this time Holt didn't even notice when his boot came down on it. The soft crackle of the photo under leather was louder than the radio chatter. Elijah's eyes fixed on it on the scuffed corner where Ruth's smile had been, and for the first time, something flickered behind his calm pain, held hostage by pride. "Sir, please," came a voice from across the road. A woman had stopped her car, half her body out the window. "He's an old man. Leave him alone," Holt's head snapped around. He didn't like witnesses, and he liked backtalk even less. "Step back, ma'am," he barked. "He's under arrest for what she shot back." Holt's answer came sharp and stupid, for attitude. The crowd thickened fast. Two men from the gas station, a jogger still holding her phone high, a teenage boy whispering, "It's all on camera." Their voices built a kind of low chorus, half outrage, half disbelief. Holt's jaw clenched tighter. "Turn around," he ordered Elijah. "Hands behind your back." Elijah didn't move at first. He just looked at him, tired, steady, unshaken. "Officer," he said quietly, "don't make a mistake you can't live with." The line didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like experience. But Holt heard it as challenge. His hand went to the cuffs. Behind him, Officer Davis shifted uneasily. Young, maybe late 20s. He'd been silent the whole time, watching the tension grow like a storm he didn't know how to stop. That's when he saw something fall from the open back seat. A dark navy cap, the fabric frayed at the edge, the letters across the front faded but unmistakable Quantico. Davis bent down and picked it up. He turned it in his hands, recognizing the name stitched into the lining. His mouth opened slightly. "Sir, is this?" Holt snatched it away before he could finish. "Evidence," he snapped and tossed it into the car like trash. The crowd gasped. The jogger whispered, "Oh my God." That was the moment it shifted from a traffic stop to something uglier. You could feel it in the air, in the way Holt's breathing quickened and Elijah's slowed. "Hands behind your back," Holt repeated, this time louder. Elijah turned calm to the end. His wrists met behind him, those old hands crossing like he'd done it before in another decade, for another officer with the same blind certainty. The metallic click of the cuffs cut through the murmurs like a hammer on glass. People shouted now, "That's abuse." He didn't do anything, but Holt wasn't listening. He tightened the cuffs, maybe too much, maybe on purpose. Davis flinched but said nothing. Elijah looked down at the cuffs, then up at the phone, recording from across the street. He didn't speak, but his eyes said it all. "Remember this." The sun caught the steel around his wrists, a blinding shimmer that burned into everyone watching. Holt's reflection glared back at him from the chrome of the car door. A man so sure of his authority, he couldn't see what it had turned him into. "Move," Holt ordered, pushing him toward the cruiser. Elijah stumbled once, caught himself, and kept walking. Each step slow, deliberate, like he was marking time in front of an audience that had finally stopped pretending not to care. As the car door opened, someone yelled, "What's your badge number?" Holt didn't answer. The door shut behind Elijah with a solid final thud. The crowd fell quiet. Only the clicking of phone cameras broke the stillness. Davis stood frozen beside the trunk, the Quantico cap lying half in shadow on the ground where Holt had thrown it. He stared at the word as if it meant something he wasn't ready to understand. Inside the cruiser, Elijah sat upright, eyes forward. The sunlight sliced through the window, striping his face and wrists. The red marks from the cuffs were deep, now raw against the dark of his skin. He turned his head slightly toward the phones, the witnesses, the world outside, and in that brief glance, it looked like he wasn't trapped at all. He looked like a man waiting for the truth to catch up. The holding cell was colder than it needed to be. Sterile walls, a hum from a dying fluorescent bulb, that sharp smell of bleach and metal. The kind of place built to strip you of warmth before it even takes your freedom. Elijah sat on the narrow bench, his wrists resting on his knees, the chain between the cuffs, whispering with every small move. His back was straight, though, always straight. You could tell this wasn't his first time meeting injustice up close. Across the hall, Officer Holt filled out the intake sheet, pretending to be composed. But his pen scratched too fast, his breathing shallow, like a man trying to outrun his own heartbeat. Every so often he glanced toward the cell, toward Elijah, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right version of himself to do it. Finally he spoke, voice low but heavy. "You think you're better than me, old man." Elijah didn't lift his head right away. When he did, his eyes were calm, not proud, not scared, just knowing. "No," he said quietly, "just older. And I've seen this movie before." Holt frowned, half confused, half insulted. "What movie?" Elijah smiled faintly. "The one where a man forgets what his badge means." The words landed soft, but hit hard. Holt shifted, trying to hide it. He went back to his paperwork, flipping the pages, like the sound could drown out what he just heard. Inside the cell, the silence thickened. Elijah looked down at his hands, wrists marked from the cuffs, the skin rubbed raw. He turned his palms up, creased tired hands that had once held a gun for his country, that had written field reports no one questioned, that had signed off on the kind of cases that kept the nation safe. For a moment his gaze drifted past the bars, past Holt to someplace decades away. Mississippi 1970. He could still smell the dirt road, hear the shouts, the dogs. He was 24 then, an FBI trainee stationed to investigate racial violence. One night, locals had dragged him out of a diner, accused him of lying about who he worked for. They beat him until his badge bent. When the real police arrived, they didn't arrest the attackers. They asked Elijah what he'd done to provoke them. The memory flickered behind his eyes, as vivid as the present. Only this time he was 72, and the badge was gone, but the question hadn't changed. He blinked, the flashback fading, and reached into his jacket pocket, where they'd tossed his belongings in a small plastic bag. He pulled out the only thing that mattered, a worn photograph of Ruth. The edges were soft, the ink a little faded. He held it up under the harsh light, and for the first time since the stop his face softened. She believed people could change, he murmured. She was stubborn that way. Holt looked up from his desk, sarcasm coiling behind his words. Men like you forget your place. Elijah's eyes lifted steady as a tide. Men like you never found theirs. It wasn't loud, but it cracked something in the room. Holt's jaw tightened. For a second, he looked ready to say more, something cruel, something that would make him feel bigger, but he stopped. Maybe because he realized that every word he said was being recorded by the camera above, or maybe because he saw in Elijah's eyes a mirror he didn't want to look into. Officer Davis lingered by the door, hands clasped behind his back. He'd been there the whole time, trying to disappear into the walls, but you could see the storm behind his eyes. He was watching the kind of moment they don't teach you how to handle in training, the line between right and wrong drawn right in front of him. Elijah turned to him, voice low but clear. Son, he said, don't let silence make you a partner. Davis froze. You could tell those words hit deeper than any order he'd ever taken. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Holt shot him a look that said, don't even think about it. Davis looked away. Holt finally stood, grabbed the folder, and slammed it shut like punctuation. You'll be processed and released, he muttered, though they both knew the tone meant when I feel like it. He walked out, boots echoing down the hallway, leaving behind a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt aware. Elijah sat there for a long moment, still holding the photo. The light above him flickered again, flashing once across his face, tracing the deep lines that told a life story longer than most case files. Then he lifted his gaze toward the small black dome in the corner, the security camera watching everything. He stared straight into it, not as a prisoner, not as a victim, but as a man, reminding whoever would see this footage later that dignity has its own kind of defiance. His expression was a mix of quiet pride and deep loneliness, like someone who's fought too many battles to expect rescue, but still believes in witnesses. That's how he sat, framed in that cold white light, one man, one truth, and the unshakable stillness of someone who's already survived worse. Morning came like an unwanted truth, bright, sharp, and impossible to ignore. The small-town station buzzed with the kind of tension that hums right before something breaks. Phones rang, papers shuffled, and somewhere down the hallway the old coffee machine hissed like it was angry too. At the front desk, Officer Davis sat staring at his screen. He hadn't slept. He'd replayed the night over and over, the cuffs, the silence, the way Holt's face twisted when the crowd shouted. The image of Elijah sitting in that cell wouldn't leave him. There was something about the old man's calm that made Davis uneasy, like he'd just watched someone wrongly crucified while pretending not to notice. Then the phone rang again, shrill, impatient. He answered, voice. Tired, Jefferson County Police Department. The voice on the other end cut like a blade. Deep, steady, federal. This is Washington, D.C. We're tracking a missing senior field advisor, Elijah Reed. Davis blinked, the words not sinking in at first. I'm sorry, sir, who Elijah Reed, the man repeated. Senior Advisor, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He's been off communication since last night. GPS shows his vehicle stopped near your precinct. Where is he? Davis's throat went dry. He looked through the window toward the holding cells. Elijah was still there, sitting on the bench, upright, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Please, Holt, Davis stammered, then half ran to the chief's office. Chief, you need to take this call. It's D.C. They're asking for that man Holt brought in. The police chief, a heavy-set man with 30 years of service and zero patience, frowned. That old guy, for what Sir Davis said, voice trembling, they said he's a senior advisor, FBI. The chief's face went still, then pale. He snatched the phone. "This is Chief Randall speaking." The voice on the other end didn't soften. "Chief, I'll make this simple. That man is one of ours. He's been with the Bureau for over 40 years. He trained our special division's profiling crisis response interrogation. If he's in your custody, you'd better have a damn good reason." Chief Randall's eyes darted toward the cell block, disbelief and fear wrestling behind them. "You mean to tell me Officer Holt arrested Elijah Reed?" "Yes," came the answer. "And if that name doesn't mean anything to you, check your own training manuals. He wrote half of them." A silence hung thick enough to choke the room. Davis swallowed hard. Somewhere outside, the faint hum of traffic drifted through the open blinds, soft and ordinary against the chaos building inside. Randall set the phone on speaker, voice trembling slightly now. We'll verify his identity immediately." Davis hurried back to the desk where Elijah's ID sat inside a plastic evidence bag. He slid it under the department scanner. The machine beeped once, the screen flashing blue, and then there it was, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The badge number, the clearance level, the unmistakable gold seal. The logo pulsed across the monitor like a siren that only shame could hear. The chief exhaled hard. "Dear God. Holt, get in here." The door banged open. Officer Holt entered, rubbing the back of his neck, still half defiant, half confused. "Sir," the chief's voice rose to a roar. "You arrested a man who trained the Bureau. Do you even realize what you've done?" Holt froze, his mouth open then shut. "That can't be right," he said quietly. "He didn't say who he was. He didn't need to," the chief snapped. "It's not his job to prove he's worthy of respect. It's yours to give it." Davis stood to the side, watching the color drain from Holt's face. The arrogance that had driven every word yesterday was gone, replaced by something small and human: fear. The phone on the desk buzzed again. The chief picked it up. "Sir," the voice from D.C. continued, calm but lethal. "You'll release him immediately, and you'll handle this with respect. He's a decorated federal officer, and Washington expects a full report on your department's conduct." "Yes, sir," the chief muttered. "Right away." He hung up, then turned to Holt. "You go back there and you uncuff him yourself." Holt hesitated. "Chief, maybe. Now, Holt." For a moment, the younger officer didn't move. Then he did, slowly, like a man walking to his own sentencing. The sound of his boots echoed against the concrete floor, every step heavier than the last. When he reached the cell, Elijah looked up, calm as dawn. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look surprised. It was as if he had known this call would come. Holt fumbled with the keys. His hands shook. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding." Elijah stood silent. The clink of the unlocking cuffs was the only reply. The metal fell away, leaving faint red bands on his wrists. He rubbed them once, then looked at Holt, not like a man forgiven, not like a man victorious, but like someone quietly disappointed by how predictable people could be. "There always is," Elijah said, his voice low even, "until it's recorded." The words settled in the room like dust after a collapse, soft but impossible to ignore. Holt looked away, jaw tight, eyes glossy, with something that wasn't quite regret yet. Davis stepped forward, still holding the old Quantico cap he'd picked up from the ground the day before. He offered it to Elijah with both hands. "Sir," he said softly, "I think this belongs to you." Elijah smiled just a fraction. "Thank you, son." He placed the cap gently on his head, straightened it, and for the first time since his arrest, looked like himself again. As he walked past Holt, the younger officer whispered, "I didn't know." Elijah stopped beside him, eyes steady. "You weren't supposed to know who I am, just who you are." Then he stepped out into the sunlight, leaving the badge, the cell, and the small-town arrogance behind him, his quiet dignity cutting through the morning brighter than any flashing light ever could. When Elijah stepped out of the holding cell, the morning light hit him like a verdict, half of his face glowing gold, the other half still caught in the gray of the fluorescent hallway. You could almost see the two sides of him there, the man the world had tried to humiliate and the one who refused to let it succeed. The station was quieter now. Not calm quiet the way a room gets after something shameful has already happened. The officers looked away as he walked past papers, suddenly fascinating. Shoelaces suddenly important. Elijah didn't hurry. His steps were slow, certain, and for the first time since he'd been brought in, he wasn't the one being watched. At the end of the corridor, Chief Randall stood waiting with Holt beside him. The chief's jaw was tight enough to crack. Holt looked smaller than before, his uniform still crisp, but his posture bent under the weight of what he'd done. The chief spoke, first voice like gravel under pressure. "You made our department a joke." Holt didn't defend himself at first. He stared at the floor, then lifted his eyes, and there was something hollow in them, a man realizing too late what he'd inherited. "I was taught to fear them, sir," he said quietly. "All my life, that's what I was told to watch my back to assume the worst." Randall's anger faltered, replaced for a moment by something like pity. He knew exactly what Holt meant, because somewhere in his own training those same lessons had been whispered too. He sighed long and heavy. "Then maybe it's time we unlearn what we were taught." No one spoke after that. Davis came down the hallway holding something small in his hands. "Sir," he said softly, stepping toward Elijah. "This was in your car." He held out the creased photo of Ruth, the one that had been stepped on and nearly lost. The edge still carried a faint print of a boot like a scar that refused to fade. Elijah took it carefully, his fingers tracing the mark before tucking the picture into his breast pocket. "Thank you, son," he said, voice rough but warm. And for the first time Davis smiled, a small, uncertain smile that felt like the beginning of something decent. Then came the sound from outside voices, cameras, the rising buzz of curiosity turned outrage. Reporters had gathered, drawn by the video that was already spreading through social media. The flashbulbs cut through the glass doors in sharp bursts of white. Questions flew faster than answers. "Mr. Reed, were you assaulted? Is the department facing federal charges? Did you identify yourself as FBI?" Elijah didn't respond. He stepped outside the crowd, parting instinctively. He faced the reporters, the cameras, the blinding daylight. For a few seconds, he said nothing, just looked at them at all those lenses, waiting for a soundbite. Then he simply shook his head. Silence. Sometimes silence says more than outrage ever could. Behind him, Holt stepped forward. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Sir, I'm sorry." Elijah turned, meeting his eyes. The young officer's face was a storm, guilt, confusion, fear. The apology hung there, raw and trembling. For a long beat, Elijah didn't move. Then he said, "Truth will speak for both of us." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't condemnation either. It was heavier than either word, something that lived between them in the space where shame turns into reckoning. The press shouted again, but Elijah had already started walking. His shadow stretched long behind him, across the polished station floor, merging with the bars of sunlight that cut through the blinds. The camera followed his back as he stepped through the front doors, the morning air folding around him like an old friend. Inside, the chief exhaled, shoulders sinking. Davis stood frozen near the desk. And Holt, he stayed rooted in place, eyes fixed on the empty hallway where Elijah had just walked. His reflection caught in the glass uniform, gleaming badge bright, and for a moment he looked like he didn't recognize the man staring back. On the desk behind him, forgotten in the shuffle, sat a single item, Elijah's old FBI cap. The light from the window struck it just right, washing it in a quiet beam of gold. The embroidered word Quantico glowed faintly under the dust, as if reminding everyone who passed through that office of one simple truth: respect can't be ordered, only earned. And as the station settled into uneasy stillness, the echo of that truth stayed behind, lingering in the sunlight, waiting for someone to finally live up to it. By the next morning, the whole country knew. The clip had exploded online, 10 million views in less than a day. No narration, no filters, no context, just 6 minutes of raw footage, an elderly black man being humiliated by a uniform, then standing tall while everyone else looked small. It spread like fire, faster than truth usually does, because this time the truth had pictures. Headlines flared across every channel: racist cop arrests, FBI legend, Georgia officer detains man who trained the bureau. Anchors spoke with righteous outrage. Morning talk shows debated whether it was ignorance, arrogance, or both. Every screen showed Elijah's calm face in those few seconds before the cuffs clicked his poise under humiliation, his silence louder than Holt's authority. Inside the Jefferson County station, Chief Randall slammed his office door shut. The walls vibrated. "Turn it off," he barked. "Get that damn video off every platform." One of the younger tech officers hesitated. "Sir, it's already been mirrored everywhere. YouTube, TikTok, news outlets." "Then start with ours," Randall snapped. "Delete the footage from the local drive. We'll issue a statement later. Something clean. Something that protects the department." Davis stood in the corner trying to look invisible, but every word stung. He'd seen the clip before it went viral. He'd heard Elijah say, "Truth forgets without witnesses." And now the same truth was being buried alive. When the chief stormed out, Davis turned toward the evidence desk. The flash drive with the original file still sat there, tagged and unguarded. His heartbeat quickened. He looked around, empty hallway, humming fluorescent light, no witnesses, but the camera that wasn't recording sound. He picked it up, slipped it into his pocket, and walked out the back door like a man carrying contraband hope. That afternoon, he drove to a quiet diner on the edge of town. Elijah was already there sitting in a corner booth, black coffee untouched. Davis slid into the seat across from him, lowering his voice. "Sir, they're trying to bury it." Elijah didn't flinch. He stared out the window for a moment at the people walking by living ordinary lives under extraordinary lies. Then he said, calm as ever, "Then let's dig it up properly." He reached for the drive, slipped it into his pocket like it weighed nothing and everything at once. By nightfall, Elijah's name wasn't just a headline, it was a symbol. An old photo of him in an FBI uniform resurfaced online alongside quotes from his years of service. Reporters wanted to hear from him to see what dignity looked like when tested. When he finally agreed to a live interview, it wasn't dramatic. He showed up in a simple suit, holding Ruth's photo tucked into his jacket. The host asked him how he felt about the man who arrested him. Elijah paused, then said, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering without hatred." The studio went silent. Even through the TV, you could feel it. He wasn't just speaking about Holt. He was speaking to a country addicted to outrage but starving for grace. Meanwhile, in a small one-bedroom apartment, Holt sat alone in the dark, the glow from the television washing over his face. His suspension letter lay folded on the table beside an untouched beer. On the screen, Elijah was speaking again, his voice calm and measured. "I've spent my life teaching agents how to see beyond fear. Fear blinds faster than darkness ever could." Holt's eyes brimmed. The sound of his own breathing was loud in the stillness. Then the phone rang. He almost didn't answer. But the name on the screen made him pick up Mom. Her voice was old, soft, and steady. "Derek," she said, "your father taught you wrong." He closed his eyes. "I know. It's time you unlearn it." The line stayed quiet after that. No lecture, no comfort. Just the kind of silence that carries both love and disappointment at once. Back across town, Elijah met the young woman who'd filmed everything, the same jogger from that morning. She was nervous, clutching her phone like it was something holy. "I don't want fame," she said. "I just wanted people to see." Elijah smiled gently. "That's all justice ever asks, to be seen." They stood in the dusk, city lights flickering on one by one. Davis joined them, holding the new USB drive that contained both the video and the police body cam footage he'd quietly copied before the chief deleted it. Together they walked up the stone steps of the federal building downtown. The glass doors reflected the flag outside its edges, catching the last orange light of day. Inside, the reception clerk looked up as Elijah approached. "Can I help you, sir?" Elijah placed the drive on the counter. "Yes," he said softly. "You'll want to file this under evidence. For the Bureau." The clerk looked at the name on his ID tag, then back at him, eyes widening in recognition. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes, sir." When they turned to leave, a beam of light from the setting sun cut across the lobby, glinting off the metal FBI seal embedded in the floor. The reflection hit Elijah's face, then the USB drive making it gleam like a tiny spark of truth refusing to die. For the first time in days, Elijah exhaled. The air felt lighter. Justice wasn't done yet, but it was awake. The public hearing was packed shoulder to shoulder, every seat filled, every breath thick with anticipation. Reporters stood 3 deep along the back wall, cameras perched like hawks, waiting for something to fall apart. The hum of whispered judgment filled the air, that sound a room makes when the nation's watching. At the front sat Marcia Lane, deputy director of the FBI, her posture composed, her eyes sharp. She'd once been Elijah Reed's student years ago at Quantico when she was a trainee, and he taught her what integrity looked like in uniform. Now she presided over the hearing that would decide what kind of justice still existed in the country he helped shape. She gavelled the room to silence. "We're here to address the conduct of Officer Derek Holt," she began, "and the events involving retired senior field advisor Elijah Reed." Her gaze shifted to Elijah, sitting a few rows back, calm, quiet, dignified, even in the storm. When she spoke again, her tone softened. "Sir, you once told me that silence can be truth," she said, voice carrying across the microphones. "I intend to make sure it's heard today." The murmurs rippled, then faded. All eyes turned to Elijah as he rose from his seat. The cameras followed him to the podium lenses, drinking in every slow, deliberate step. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need any. He looked out at the crowd, press, police, civilians, politicians, and said simply, "You stopped me for what you saw, not for what I did. That's not duty, it's fear in uniform." Gasps scattered through the room like sparks. The words hung there, crisp and undeniable. From the table nearby, Holt shifted in his chair. His uniform looked smaller on him now, the bright badge glinting like an accusation. "I did what I was trained to do," he said, voice tight, defensive. Elijah turned slightly toward him. "Then it's time," he said. "Steady and low we train hearts, not hands." The sentence hit harder than any shout could. You could feel the room freeze, the weight of what he meant settling in like judgment itself. Holt's mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes glistened, the color draining from his face. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles went white, the fight in him collapsing under something heavier than guilt, under realization. From the witness stand, Officer Davis cleared his throat. His voice was quiet but unwavering. "I told him to stop," he said. He didn't. The sentence landed like a final blow, not out of vengeance, but truth. Pure, plain truth. Holt's head dropped. The camera zoomed in. The nation watched a man unravel in real time. Marcia Lane leaned forward, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Badges," she said slowly, "are borrowed. Integrity is earned." For a long moment, nobody moved. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the faint shuffle of reporters adjusting their lenses. Holt reached for his chest. His hand lingered there, trembling. Then he unclipped the badge, his symbol, his shield, and stared at it like it had betrayed him. When he placed it on the table, the sound it made was small, metallic, but it carried like a church bell, one clear ring that silenced every whisper in the room. Elijah didn't look triumphant. He looked tired but also peaceful, like he'd just set something down he'd been carrying for too many years. Marcia nodded once in his direction, her voice soft again. "Justice isn't always loud," she said. "Sometimes it's the moment we stop pretending not to see." As the hearing adjourned, the crowd didn't applaud. They just stood quiet, moved, maybe ashamed. Holt sat alone staring at the badge, and Davis walked over to rest a hand on his shoulder. Elijah turned from the podium and headed for the exit. Every flashbulb burst against his back like sparks, but he never looked back. The light caught his profile as he stepped through the doors, half shadow, half glow, like a man leaving behind not victory but balance. Inside, the badge still lay on the table, catching the last bit of sunlight through the tall windows. It shimmered once, then went, still a symbol no longer of power but of consequence. The rain came hard that night, thick, endless sheets hammering the windshield until the wipers gave up trying to keep up. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and red taillights bleeding into the dark. Inside the car, Derek Holt drove with no destination, the silence between thunderclaps louder than the engine. His badge lay on the passenger seat, glinting faintly under each flash of lightning. Every time his eyes met it, the weight of what it meant or no longer meant pressed a little harder on his chest. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a single word: "Mom." He hesitated, wiped at his face with the back of his hand, and answered. But it wasn't her voice this time. It was a nurse. Quiet, practiced, heavy. "Mr. Holt, I'm sorry. Your mother passed an hour ago. Heart failure." She watched the hearing. For a moment, the world stopped. The wipers froze mid-swipe, the thunder faded. The only thing he could hear was the rain tapping harder against the glass, like it was filling in the silence his voice couldn't. He pulled over by an empty field, gravel crunching under the tires. The headlights cut through the downpour for a moment before he switched them off. Then he stepped out into the storm. No umbrella, no jacket, just the man, the rain, and the truth that had finally caught up to him. The badge slid from the seat onto the wet ground, landing face up beside a puddle. Holt stared down at it, water pooling around the metal like it was trying to wash it clean. He lifted his face to the sky, rain streaming down his cheeks, indistinguishable from the tears already there. "You were right, Mom," he said, his voice cracking into the wind. "You were right." Lightning flashed, sharp, white, merciless, and for a moment it caught everything. The soaked uniform, the trembling hand over his heart, the empty look of a man who just realized that redemption always costs more than guilt. Miles away in a small house, lit only by a single lamp, Elijah Reed sat at his desk. The news still murmured faintly on the television, replaying fragments of the hearing, but he wasn't listening. Before him lay a framed photograph, Ruth, her eyes warm, her smile still gentle after all these years. He traced the glass with his fingertips, the sound of rain tapping at the window, syncing with his heartbeat. Maybe, he whispered, justice finally learned to walk. Outside, thunder rolled low across the distance as if answering him. He leaned back in his chair, eyes soft but heavy, the kind of look a man wears when the world hurts, but not without hope. Another flash of lightning tore across the sky, and in that same instant, two worlds aligned. In Elijah's room, the light flared against the frame of Ruth's photo. On the roadside, it danced across Holt's badge lying in the mud. Two symbols, one of love, one of duty, both catching the same light as if the heavens had decided to link them in silent understanding. Holt sank to his knees in the downpour, his hands closing around the badge. The rain poured harder, but he didn't move. He just knelt there, face to the ground, whispering apologies the wind carried away before anyone could hear. And in that same moment, Elijah stood by his window watching the rain trail down the glass. His reflection merged with Ruth's photo, their faces overlapping in the lightning's glow. For a heartbeat, he almost smiled. The night ended the way all reckonings do, not with noise but with quiet surrender. One man on his knees, clutching the weight of what he'd broken. Another staring into the storm, holding on to what he'd never lost: dignity, faith, and the belief that even pain can be proof of progress. Outside, the rain kept falling steady, cleansing, relentless. The rain came hard that night, thick, endless sheets hammering the windshield, until the wipers gave up trying to keep up. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and red taillights bleeding into the dark. Inside the car, Derek Holt drove with no destination, the silence between thunderclaps louder than the engine. His badge lay on the passenger seat, glinting faintly under each flash of lightning. Every time his eyes met it, the weight of what it meant or no longer meant pressed a little harder on his chest. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a single word: Mom. He hesitated, wiped at his face with the back of his hand, and answered. But it wasn't her voice this time. It was a nurse. Quiet, practiced, heavy. Mr. Holt, I'm sorry. Your mother passed an hour ago. Heart failure. She watched the hearing. For a moment, the world stopped. The wipers froze mid-swipe, the thunder faded. The only thing he could hear was the rain tapping harder against the glass, like it was filling in the silence his voice couldn't. He pulled over by an empty field, gravel crunching under the tires. The headlights cut through the downpour for a moment before he switched them off. Then he stepped out into the storm, no umbrella, no jacket, just the man, the rain, and the truth that had finally caught up to him. The badge slid from the seat onto the wet ground, landing face up beside a puddle. Holt stared down at it, water pooling around the metal like it was trying to wash it clean. He lifted his face to the sky, rain streaming down his cheeks, indistinguishable from the tears already there. You were right, Mom, he said, his voice cracking into the wind. You were right. Lightning flashed, sharp, white, merciless, and for a moment it caught everything. The soaked uniform, the trembling hand over his heart, the empty look of a man who just realized that redemption always costs more than guilt. Miles away, in a small house, lit only by a single lamp, Elijah Reed sat at his desk. The news still murmured faintly on the television, replaying fragments of the hearing, but he wasn't listening. Before him lay a framed photograph, Ruth, her eyes warm, her smile still gentle after all these years. He traced the glass with his fingertips, the sound of rain tapping at the window, syncing with his heartbeat. Maybe, he whispered, justice finally learned to walk. Outside, thunder rolled low across the distance as if answering him. He leaned back in his chair, eyes soft but heavy, the kind of look a man wears when the world hurts but not without hope. Another flash of lightning tore across the sky, and in that same instant, two worlds aligned. In Elijah's room, the light flared against the frame of Ruth's photo. On the roadside, it danced across Holt's badge lying in the mud. Two symbols, one of love, one of duty, both catching the same light as if the heavens had decided to link them in silent understanding. Holt sank to his knees in the downpour, his hands closing around the badge. The rain poured harder, but he didn't move. He just knelt there, face to the ground, whispering apologies the wind carried away before anyone could hear. And in that same moment, Elijah stood by his window, watching the rain trail down the glass. His reflection merged with Ruth's photo, their faces overlapping in the lightning's glow. For a heartbeat, he almost smiled. The night ended the way all reckonings do, not with noise, but with quiet surrender. One man on his knees, clutching the weight of what he'd broken. Another staring into the storm, holding on to what he'd never lost: dignity, faith, and the belief that even pain can be proof of progress. Outside, the rain kept falling steady, cleansing, relentless. The rain didn't fall, it roared. Derek Holt's wipers slapped pointlessly across the glass, each stroke smearing the water into streaks that glowed under the highway lights. His badge lay on the seat beside him, a dull circle of brass catching every flash of lightning like it was trying to be noticed. He hadn't gone home after the hearing. He didn't know where he was going now. The phone vibrated once, a single name on the screen: Mom. He answered, breath shallow. But it wasn't her. A nurse's voice, careful and small. She passed an hour ago, Mr. Holt. Heart failure. She was watching the broadcast. For a long beat, the rain did all the talking. He pulled the car onto the shoulder, turned off the engine, and stepped out. The downpour hit like penance, flattening his hair, soaking his uniform. The badge slipped off the seat, clattered onto the gravel. He bent, picked it up, and stared at it until the words blurred. You were right, Mom, he said, voice breaking. You were right. Lightning split the sky, and for one frozen second, it painted everything. Silver, the rain, the badge, the look of a man who finally understood what his mother meant about fear and decency. Across town, Elijah Reed sat by the window of a small, quiet house. The TV muttered the evening news in the background, but he wasn't watching. His eyes were fixed on a framed photograph of Ruth, the corners worn from years of touch. Maybe, he murmured, justice finally learned to walk. A flash lit the room. The lightning caught the glass of Ruth's photo just as it struck Holt's badge miles away. Two cold reflections of the same truth, one of loss, one of awakening. Holt sank to his knees beside his car, clutching the badge so tightly it cut into his palm. He didn't notice the pain. The rain hid his tears, washing the mud from the engraved number, until it gleamed faintly in the stormlight. Elijah stood at the window, watching the storm blur the streetlights into halos. The rain ran down the glass and across his reflection, mixing with the faint shimmer in his eyes. One man knelt in the storm, another stood in the quiet, both learning at last that redemption and justice are never loud. They arrive like rain, steady, relentless, cleansing everything they touch. A month later, the gray chill of early spring hung over Washington, D.C. But inside the FBI Academy auditorium, the air was electric. Rows of cadets in crisp uniforms sat, upright hands, folded faces glowing with anticipation. It was graduation day one that felt different, heavier, almost sacred. Deputy Director Marcia Lane stepped up to the microphone. She paused for a moment, letting the hum of excitement settle into silence. Then she smiled, her voice steady but warm. "Today we honor not just achievement," she said, "but awakening. Our next speaker taught us something that training manuals never could. He showed us that truth doesn't shout, it listens." Please welcome Senior Field Advisor Mr. Elijah Reed. The applause rose like a tide. Elijah walked slowly to the podium, the kind of walk that carried both time and grace. His suit was simple, his expression calm. But when he looked up at that sea of young faces, the room quieted completely, as if everyone knew instinctively that something important was about to be said. He rested both hands on the podium. His voice, when it came, was low but strong, each word shaped by experience, not authority. Just as he began, isn't about who you stop. It's about what you see when you look in the mirror. You could feel it land soft but deep, like rain on dry earth. Some cadets blinked hard. A few lowered their heads. He continued, steady, unhurried. "You'll wear the badge. You'll make choices that echo long after the moment ends. But remember this, every face you meet carries a story you haven't lived. Don't mistake silence for guilt or calm for weakness. Listen long enough, and the truth will tell you who to be." Then he stopped speaking. No big finish, no raised voice. Just that quiet, steady truth hanging in the air like a heartbeat. The silence broke into applause, then into something louder. The entire hall rose to its feet, hundreds of palms striking together until it sounded like thunder. Even Marcia wiped at her eyes before clapping again. From the very back row, a man in a black suit stood up too. Derek Holt. No uniform now, no badge. Just a quiet man with eyes that carried both regret and peace. He didn't seek attention. He just stood there, clapping slowly, a faint smile on his lips, a man who'd finally learned to see. Elijah's eyes found him for just a moment. No words passed, but the silence between them said everything it needed to. When the applause finally faded, Elijah turned to the small table beside the podium. He took a framed photo of Ruth from his briefcase, the same one that had survived everything, and set it down gently next to his old FBI badge. The sunlight from the tall windows caught the two items at once, reflecting upward, a single beam stretching across the wall, merging gold and silver into one warm glow. It was more than a reflection. It was a symbol, justice and love, duty and mercy, two halves of the same light. As the ceremony ended, cadets lined up to shake his hand. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, but Elijah barely noticed. He looked once more at the photo and the badge, the light still glinting across both. Then he turned toward the doors. His shadow stretched long across the stage as he walked away, measured, unhurried, almost weightless. And as he disappeared into the golden hallway, beyond a voice, mine, maybe yours, seemed to echo softly behind him. He never raised his voice. But the truth spoke louder than any siren. In a world that rushes to judge, Elijah's story reminds us that justice begins with how we choose to see one another. True strength isn't found in shouting louder. It's in listening deeper, standing taller, and walking away with grace instead of hate. If this story moved, you hit like, share it with someone who still believes in justice, and subscribe to Mr. Mac Stories for more true-to-life tales that remind us what humanity can be. Your support keeps our team inspired to craft stories with heart, purpose, And meaning stories that prove the quiet truth always finds its way home. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, we don't just tell stories, we let justice speak.